and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This is Irreverend, Faith and Current Affairs.
Welcome back to Irreverend, Faith and Current Affairs with me, Jamie Franklin, and Tom Pelham. Thomas, not in person this week, sadly, but still together in spirit and on the internet.
Indeed, yes.
And how are you today?
Very good. Enjoyed the rain yesterday. I know we're not normally supposed to talk about the weather, Jamie, but it was truly wonderfully torrential. I like it. It was apocalyptic almost in its. If it kept on going, I think we had 10 centimeters in about an hour.
Yeah,
which is a lot of rain. And the garden's already looking better for it, so that's good.
Yeah, my lawn's looking a lot healthier. Does that mean that there aren't going to be hosepipe bans now, or?
They'll probably find that they didn't capture enough of the water to make it.
They're so incompetent. They can't even utilize the rain to avert a hosepipe ban. Is that what you're telling me?
I don't know. Do you know about this hosepipe bans? Now, in theory, I've got one here at the moment, but I've got a hosepipe. I've got a hosepipe ban as well. Obviously not using the hosepipe. But the thing that surprises me is that they haven't sent a letter. They haven't sent an email. They haven't sent me any information about the fact that, in theory, I'll get a fine of £1,000 if I was using the hosepipe. I mean, they just sort of. How do they expect me to know other than to read the news, which is not something I'm obliged to do? You can't, It's a bit much, really. They really ought to, at the very least, send an apologetic letter saying, sorry, we are so bad at mending our water pipes that we are running out of water, and so we're going to have to ask you not to use your hose pipe. But there's no official communication. I'm not certain that that's legal. Can they just declare it? I mean, what?
I don't know. Isn't there something about the law which is that not knowing the law is not an excuse for breaking it?
Yeah, but you have to make. I mean, the law is publicly available. You can get it. You can find it.
I think so. Yeah, I don't know. Who knows, Tom? Who knows? But this is evidence, isn't it, that you do know? So
I do know. So I'm not doing it.
Don't try and get away with it now.
I'm just a bit surprised. Like, can they really do that? Just declare it without actually telling you? It's a bit irritating.
I hear what you're saying. Listen, Tom, I'm sorry about this. It's obviously been distressing for you. I've got a couple of notices to begin with. So just for new people, this is Irreverend, Faith and Current Affairs. We talk about current affairs from the perspective of Christian faith, as the name may suggest. It may sound simple, but lots of people enjoy it. And you're very welcome if you're new. If you've been with us for some time and you'd like to support what we do, you can always buy us a coffee on buymeacoffee.com. Or you can support us monthly on Patreon at patreon.com/irreverend, which is really, really helpful and encouraging to us when people do support us. On Patreon, you can go there, patreon.com/irreverend, and sponsor the podcast for as little as £1.50 plus VAT per month. So you can do that. Or you can find all details about how to support us and all our episodes and everything on our brand new website, www.irreverendpod.com. Irreverendpod.com. You can go there for all your irreverent needs, and we're looking to expand that and do more stuff on that website soon. On buymeacoffee.com, you can also leave a little message. I thought I'd read some of these messages out. They're quite nice. So buy me a coffee. The way it works is you don't buy an actual coffee. It's not real coffee. It's just money that you might spend on a coffee. Say if we were in a coffee shop together and you said to us, well, we love your podcast and we'd like to buy you a coffee. Now, you can't do that because we're not in the same place. But what you can do is you can go on buymeacoffee.com and give the money that you might have spent on a really expensive coffee, i.e. £5 expensive for a coffee, and give it to us. And then we can put it towards the show and the expense of running the show and so on. So anyway, some messages. Someone bought a coffee. You don't have to leave your name. This is anonymous. Thank you for being authentic. It brings me joy to hear you discern the times, and it resonates with my own spirit. Even though optimism in man-made structures is lacking, understandably, I can't help being excited. Time to fell old trees not producing fruit. God, the perfect gardener, has got this. Interesting. I would say, Tom, I don't know about the metaphor. I would prefer the trees to grow back in a healthy way rather than for them to be...
Well, unless the sort of the sort of crisis that postmodernism is bringing is sort of a new tree that's tried to grow and is producing bad fruit, and clearing it out of the way will allow orthodox good trees to take that space up. It's a bit like my in my garden we had an ash tree come down because it has ash dieback, and it's been cut down and it's now nicely piled in logs waiting for the winter, but the fact that it's gone has left the field maple underneath it is now flourishing, and it's a beautiful tree with beautiful leaves. So so sometimes the bad tree coming down gives space for good things to re-flourish.
I hear what you're saying there. That's true. Although the metaphor I would use for postmodernism is it's more like a kind of sort of choking weed or a bramble or something that grows up around a healthy plant and sucks the life out of it and destroys it. And we can certainly do with less of that.
Maybe anyway, ivy. Brambles give you blackberries, which are quite tasty. So
maybe brambles not the right, like a demonic weed,
like an ivy.
Postmodernism isn't a tree, is it? It's not something that gives life and is organic. It's something that seeks to destroy.
It's a parasite.
Yeah, and to take down other things. Anyway, before we go further into this arboretorial metaphorical space, I think we should just read a few more.
It's quite a nice space to be in, though, isn't it? I mean, far as
it's very biblical. It's in the Bible. It's all over the Bible. Right. Hello, Jamie, Daniel, and Tom. It's my pleasure to buy you chaps coffee. Please do keep up the good works. Love your show. Thank you. Thank you, says Gabrielle, for your interesting podcast. As a lockdown skeptic, I always enjoy listening to them. God bless. And then somebody else has written this. I like when we get messages like this, which we do quite often. My favorite podcast. I'm not really religious, but I'm thinking about it more, having listened to you all. That's good. I'm pleased. Really pleased to hear that. That's great news. So if you'd like to go and buymeacoffee.com, leave us a message, buy us coffee, please do so.
Can I put a shout out, a word of thanks? So someone, obviously, a listener, has heard the plea about my hydrangea a few weeks ago.
Oh my goodness.
And sent me a pair of beautiful hydrangeas ready to go in the garden to replace the one that's died. So thank you very much. They are they arrived during last week, and almost the sun got to them whilst we were away on holiday. But I have they're fine. They're fine, and they're looking beautiful, and they'll go in. Lovely. So thank you very much. Thank you very much.
You know the person's name?
I did, and then I lost the card whilst I was tidying the office. They'll know who they are. They know who they are, and it's genuine thanks.
Sorry, Tom, I didn't mean to trip you on that. All right, okay, so one more notice before we get into some stuff. Friend of the show, Dave Brennan, who runs Brephos, which I think Brephos' website is brephos.org. Brephos.org, BREPHOS.org. It's an organization that helps Christians to think in a Christian and godly way about abortion and the problems that abortion poses for our society. Dave has just started a new podcast, which is called About Abortion, which is available on YouTube. There's several episodes on there. And that's just Dave basically trying to expand the work he's doing and make it more available to more people. So if you are, particularly if you're a church leader or somebody who's trying to learn more about abortion and engaging with it from a Christian perspective, you can find the About Abortion podcast from Brephos on YouTube. And I will put a link to the channel in the show notes, which are just under here for YouTube viewers, and or if you're on any other video platform, and they'll be underneath the logo, the Irreverend logo, if you're looking for them on audio podcasts. So please do check that out. About abortion. Now, Tom.
Yes.
Have you ever heard the phrase "football is a man's game"? Have you ever heard?
I have, yeah.
So this is apparently unacceptable to say this now. After the Battle of the Bridge this Sunday, which was a largely unenjoyable game from a Spurs perspective, apart from at the end when Harry Kane scored in the 96th minute and drew level with Chelsea 2-2 at Stamford Bridge. Graham Souness, who's a notorious hard man, Mr. Football, he's 69 now, but he was notorious for putting in some crunching challenges, injuring his opponents, elbowing them in the jaw, all that kind of stuff, left, right, and centre. He said, Tom, he had the temerity to say that it's a man's game all of a sudden again. Now,
but I mean, he's obviously not talking about the women's Euros, is he? He's talking about the game in front of him, though, isn't he?
He was. Yeah.
So all the upset is sort of slightly. He's literally using it as a metaphor for violence and unrestricted violence in football.
Let me read some of the BBC article because it's really funny. It's a man's game all of a sudden again, Souness said on Sunday. I think we've got our football back, as I would enjoy football. Men at it, blow for blow, and the referee letting them get on with it. Former Liverpool and Scotland midfielder Souness was sitting beside Karen Carney, who won 144 caps for England. That's a woman, by the way. Presenter Dave Jones immediately added, "Oh, it's also a women's game as well." And
not the one in front of them, presumably. It's very silly. But I do want to say, because my wife did mention to me as sort of feedback. She said, "You know what? But can't women have football? What's wrong with women having football as a game?" And I don't have a problem with women's football. There's no problem with it. I think I can admire their sportsmanship. That's completely the wrong thing to say, isn't it?
What are you admiring?
The skill. I mean, as far as I admire any football, like I said, I don't really watch any of it. The skill and the dedication required to do it. There's nothing wrong with women's football. There's nothing morally intrinsically wrong with it. I think the problem that we had with it was that it feels like there was an attempt to push it beyond. It wasn't sort of because it's a good sport, but because it's women playing it. And I think that was the issue, wasn't it? Not that women are playing sport. Not that there's a problem with women playing sport. Is that the sort of the sense from the advertising and the sense of the sort of the big banners and everything was not you should watch this because it's good sport, but the feeling was you should watch this because it's women playing sport, and if you don't watch it, you're misogynistic. And that's the problem. Not that they're playing sport. It's that, and it took me a while to sort of put my finger on it. It's not that they're playing sport. It's not even that they're advertising sport. It just felt that what they're saying is you have to support this, you have to watch this, because if you don't, then you're not really a football supporter. You're just a misogynistic, and that's not true, is it? Like, it's perfectly reasonable to not like women's football, but to like men's football, or indeed
just have no interest in it.
Or to have no interest.
One of the things is, Tom, is it's also about the attempt to, I would say, to really denigrate sports which have been traditionally associated with women and promote sports which have been traditionally associated with men. So I obviously watched the Spurs Chelsea game, but all the adverts were promoting what I would call a sort of feminist view of society, of sport, of the world. So there was a Royal Navy advert, for example, with all women people in the Royal Navy.
Talking of Royal Navy, did you see the Royal Air Force have stopped recruiting white men in order to get their diversity? Like, they're literally they are deliberately reducing the quality of our armed forces in order to hit diversity thing, which is if you think about it, stupid.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's sort of racist. It's sort of a bit racist as well, isn't it, to not hire white people just because they're white. Anyway, let me finish what I was saying, because otherwise it might come across as somewhat sexist if I don't finish this point. And also there was an advert from, I think it was Barclays. It's all this stakeholder capitalism stuff, isn't it? Because what's this got to do with Barclays? But Barclays are apparently supporting the nationwide effort to have young girls in school be able to access football as easily as boys, and that was when the penny dropped about this particular thing for me, because I thought, when I was at school, when I was at primary school, I played football. When I was at secondary school, I played rugby, and the girls played hockey and netball and things like that. And really, what this is about is a similar move to the move, from mother and homemaker to women in the office. It's about saying, well, the traditional women's traditional women's sports are not worthy of women, and women actually need to be involving themselves in games which have been traditionally associated with men, which to my mind is about the ideological attempt to remove any distinction between men and women in society. So I do think there's an important aspect to this as well. But overall, I just find this funny. This particular story. So Bethany England, who is she's a player for England. Her name is England, and she plays for England, I suppose. Anyway, she on Twitter, she said it's a man's game, men at it. So with quotation marks. I don't know why I said men at it. I mean, that sounds very much like something else, doesn't it? But then she wrote, "Get in the bin," and it's an emoji of a bin. What a disgraceful thing to say after the summer this country has just seen. The thing about this that amuses me, though, Tom, is the bin is a waste paper bin, and I don't think you could fit Graham Souness in a waste paper bin. I mean, he is Mr. Football. You'd have to put him in a skip or in a at least one of those wheelie bins you keep outside your house. So, but the really good thing is, Souness has said he regretted not a word. He's not going to bow down to council culture.
He's issued a clarification now, though, hasn't he? So, it's always going to happen. Do you know, I was quite interested.
What did he clarify?
That he was talking not about football as a whole, but as about that particular game, which is quite obvious from the context. Like, he was enjoying the robust physicality of the game and the flow that the referees allowed. And I think we all do. I mean, when I do watch football, it's got very bitty, hasn't it? Like, for a while, it was very bitty. Like, every single.
It was quite pedantic the way it's been refereed for the last few years, and it's been relaxed quite significantly in the Premier League. So there's quite a lot more violence, which is much better. And also, Chelsea versus Spurs, the managers were like at it, in each other's face. Conte and Tuchel like squaring up to each other, and they held. So at the end of the game, Conte went up to shake Tuchel's hands. And Tuchel's really angry because he's just drawn in the last minute, had the 3-point snatch away. And he held on to Conte's hand. He wouldn't let his hand go. And he said, "Look at me in the eye," or "Look at me," or something like that. And the expression on Conte's face when Conte's like, he can't believe that this guy has got the temerity to not let his hand go. And then, you've got all the technical staff and the players come around in this big melee, and it's all like pushing and shoving. It's fantastic.
I don't know about that, Jimmy.
It is, honestly, Tom.
I prefer my sports a little bit more cerebral. Cricket.
This is a
none of that happens in cricket.
This is part of the tradition of football nation, though. It is about men letting off steam. No, but everyone was fine afterwards. He came into the press conference. He flashed his bicep. He made a big joke about it all. So it's not a big deal. It's just handbags.
I wanted to talk.
I probably shouldn't say that, actually.
No, probably not. Yeah.
Carry on.
I wanted to mention, because tangentially, whilst we're sort of doing things backwards here, because this is supposed to be like a little thing. But did you read Paul Kingsnorth's essay, "The West Has Lost Its Home"?
No.
It reminded me about something you're saying, because I'm just gonna read a tiny bit of it out, because it's quite interesting. Paul Kingsnorth, a sort of right-wing philosopher, I think it's fair to say, isn't it? Have we talked about him before?
Is he right-wing?
I don't know.
I think he's probably
sort of countercultural.
Left-wing.
Maybe
environmentalist, isn't he? He's become an Eastern Orthodox Christian recently. Go on, carry on.
It says this: the liberation of women is often translated into the separating of women from their self-sufficiency, as men were separated before them, and their bedding instead into the world of commerce, whether they want it or not. My point, he says, is not that women should get back into the kitchen, it is that we all should. Modernity prized the men away from the home first, as the Industrial Revolution broke their cottage industries and swept them into factories and mines, where their brute strength could be useful. Later, the woman, who had mostly left to tend the home single-handedly, was subject to the same process. The needs of businesses were sold to both sexes as a project of liberation from home, family, and place. And I think that's true. Like, it's not that when you say homemaker, that was not just the woman's role traditionally. Going back, there's this sort of idol of the nuclear family, and yet the nuclear family is a bit of a construction of. Arguably a construction of capitalism, because it's something that you can sell and something that can be sold to. Whereas before, you almost had a nuclear village or the nuclear multi-generational family, not just 2 parents and 3 kids, but two parents, their parents, maybe their aunts and uncles, maybe their cousins, all in the same community in the same place. And that's sort of natural humanity. It's much more tribal, I guess, in a sense.
No, I agree.
And not the nuclear family, which is a sort of false idea of sustainability and integrity. which is a bit of an idol, I think, actually.
It's certainly true. When you remove all of the scaffolding from around the nuclear family, let's call it, parents and children, then the nuclear family itself becomes this sort of hollowed out entity, which is a sort of isolated family in the midst of a sort of atomized society. And what happens, in the traditional nuclear family, is that the kids go off to school and the husband goes off to work and the woman is just left alone in the house.
Yeah.
And she does, it's like the house is like a body without a soul, because all the people are gone and the woman's just left there to kind of tidy up or cook the food or whatever. And that, you're absolutely right. That's really a denigration of the proper concept of the traditional family, which is multi-generational. It's embedded in a community. It's embedded in a Christian church congregation as well, and oftentimes is associated with the family business. Yoram Hazony talks about this in his new book on conservatism. We'll be speaking to him in a few weeks, I think next month, on that book. But that's a really important point, Tom. Yeah, definitely.
And it's good. It's what the West has lost its home. It starts off with a reflection on the centrality of a fire, as the communal hearth. As sort of an attack on the, which for all that you're saying, he's an environmentalist. This is an attack on the environmental attempts to reduce wood stoves and home fires to the past, in favor of clinical electric heating.
Yeah, well, you can be a conservative environmentalist. You can believe that the environment is worth conserving without thinking that we have to buy into the eco madness of the green ideological agenda. Tom, there was one thing I was going to say. I don't think this thing about the traditional the nuclear family is caused by capitalism. I think it's caused by industrialization and secularism. I think that's an important thing to say, because it's not necessarily capitalism, isn't it?
Capitalism is a shorthand, really, maybe for. But I think it's something that's easy, like I say, easy to sell and easy to sell too. And my favorite satire of it is Edward Scissorhands. I
haven't seen that for many years, actually. Tell me why.
I just there's that. I mean, I say there are many of them, but there's that wonderful empty sort of community that exists next to the castle, if you remember, sort of the pastel colours.
I don't remember it. I haven't seen it since I was a child.
When he enters the family and discovers sort of how unhealthy the sort of the exterior, the sort of exterior outlook of that nuclear family is actually hollow in the middle. And they're all sort of, all the men drive off in the morning and all the women try and sell each other products using magazines. I don't, what I mean? There's a sort of pettiness to it, the American dream.
I completely agree. And
anyway,
this is also, incidentally, we might talk about this later because it might come up, but this is also why it's this sort of this post-Christian secularism, this sort of aggressive post-Christian secularism with the neo-Marxism that's sort of taking over. This is actually an opportunity for us to rediscover traditional forms of family life, including, I would say, educating children at home and not sending children off to school, and also conducting business in a way which is more family orientated as well, being around the family home more. I'm not advocating for screens and remote disembodied relationships. I'm not saying that, because I don't think that's an unambiguous blessing, even given the format we're using this morning. But you see what I'm saying? It is an opportunity to reevaluate, how do we don't, especially as Christians, we don't just want to imitate this model, which clearly doesn't work. It clearly doesn't produce a healthy society. It clearly doesn't produce healthy, spiritually healthy individuals. Let's rethink it, and let's go back to traditional forms of family life and rediscover those things. But Tom, that's good. I'll put the Paul Kingsnorth thing on West's Homeless. I've got the link there. I'll put it on the show notes for anyone who wants to follow that up. I like Paul Kingsnorth. It'd be good to have him on at some point. Right. Let's do a bit of Bible, shall we?
Let's do a bit of Bible.
Should we do, Tom? Should we dare to venture to do the Lord's Prayer this morning? Do you want to do it for us?
Go on then.
Go on. You go for it.
Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive them that trespass against us. Forgive us. Jamie, it's happened again. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from sin. Oh, I've done it again. Oh, Jamie. It's not good, is it?
I'm going to have to do it next week.
You're going to have to do it next week.
Amen.
Right. Deliver us from the evil one, I should say, which is a reasonable.
Deliver us from evil.
From evil,
Come on, Tom. Come on. You're a priest. Is it because you always have it written down in front of you?
It's just like I just have a block in Irreverend.
Okay.
I start worrying about it halfway through and then get it wrong.
It's the devil. It's a demonic distraction. Right. We're going to read from Book of Genesis now, chapter 41, verses 25 to 36. Now, the context here you may remember from Scripture, or indeed from the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, or whatever it's called, which is a great musical, by the way. Don't denigrate it. It's really good. The songs are really good. Joseph is interpreting Pharaoh's dreams to him. So Pharaoh's had dreams about ears of corn, 7 ears of corn, 7 empty, 7 full, 7 thin cows and 7 fat cows. And I think I'm right in saying is that the thin cows eat up the fat cows, and the empty ears of corn eat up the full ears of corn. That's right, isn't it, Tom?
I'm just gonna get it open.
Okay, all right. So, well, anyway, that is right. So I'll read this out.
That's right. There you go. Go on then.
Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears, blighted by the east wind, are also 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them, there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow, for it will be very severe. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dreams means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through famine." It might already be reasonably clear why I've chosen this passage today. It's a passage actually I've been thinking about for quite a while, because we did it in our family Bible reading not too long ago, but it stayed with me because it is an example of godly prudence and wisdom, isn't it, Tom? We see the possibility, and in this case the certainty of famine, and what we're going to do is we're going to store up grain, we're going to keep some over, we're going to plan for the future, and then we'll have enough to get through the 7 years that are coming. And of course, what happens then in the story is all the world come to Egypt after Joseph has been placed in charge of this project, and he's executed it successfully, and all the world come to him and they start borrowing grain, and he basically it makes Egypt incredibly rich through them selling their land and their labor to him, and so on and so forth. So it's a parable which is about a story. It's about godly wisdom. Select a wise man, put him in charge of this. Sorry, Karen.
It's also quite interesting because it's not. So on the one hand, you have this story. On the other hand, you have the foolish farmer in Matthew.
Very good. Yeah,
who stores up and then dies the next day, and you fool who your barns are full, but you're dead. But the other point about this that's different is that Jacob is doing it through faith in God and putting God there, but also it's also God's providence for Israel. Israel being Jacob's father, of course. Joseph, sorry, Israel. Honestly, it's too early in the morning irreverence.
Come on.
So Joseph's father, Israel, whose faith is known. He founds the Israelite nation, of course, named after him. This is God providing for him through his faith.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
So it's not. So it's a bit different. But I mean, it's not saying try and be self-sufficient. It's saying try and be our sufficiency and our goodness comes from God. So you have to acknowledge that first, as Jacob does, and then and indeed God gives him the power to interpret the dreams, and then to be good stewards of that which we are given.
Yeah, and to lay up for the future. So the difference between this and the foolish rich
Farmer.
man.
Yeah.
Is he a farmer? All right, yeah, the foolish. It's not called the foolish farmer though, is it? Although that's a good name.
No, I think it is.
Okay, all right, okay. Well, it probably depends on your Bible translation what the title they put in. Anyway, so the difference is he's just doing it for no reason. He just wants more because he just enjoys having an abundance. Whereas Joseph and Pharaoh do it because they foresee in wisdom a crisis which is coming along. Now, this is, I mean, it's quite clear how this applies to our situation. And the reason I thought, yes, we're going to do this today is because I was reading an article that was shared in Spiked magazine, which is written by Fraser Myers, and it's called A Cost of Living Crisis Made by Our Elites. Decades of complacency and groupthink coming home to roost. And the thing that comes across over and over again in this article is the short-termism of the thinking of the people who have made the decisions, which have landed us in this situation where now we're looking at the inflation rate being announced at 10.1% this week, and the worry about energy blackouts in the winter, and possibly even shortages of gas and things like that as well. So and food shortages and so on and so forth. So several things that he mentions. Clearly, one of them is the recent invasion of or incursion or whatever you want to call it.
See, I'm surprised. Because I'm not certain that actually that has as much. Spiked a very
well, yeah. I mean, listen, Tom. I mean, he does say that this has exacerbated a pre-existing problem, and it's not an excuse to say, well, we didn't know that.
But it's not. Happen. I mean, it's a bit like saying that the lockdowns did it. It's not the lockdowns, is it? It's our choice to try and starve Russia of money in order to aid Ukraine that has caused the cost of living crisis, or at least has caused the short-term inflation in fuel prices. But I mean, there is a problem going back a bit further. But yeah, that's one of the issues.
Yeah, but one of the so let's talk about the other stuff in a minute. But one of the interesting things he says is towards the end of the article, he says that this kind of complacency has been caused by I think he uses the phrase, I can't quite find it now.
An end of history stupor.
End of history stupor as well. So that's an allusion to Francis Fukuyama's theory that liberal democracy constitutes the end of history, meaning that it's the most perfect and settled form of government there can be, and there won't be any sort of development of it or any deviation away from it. And one of the implications of that is taken to be that nations which are liberal democracies or a part of groups of liberal democratic nations like the ones in Europe won't be beset by problems like international wars. So there won't be another war in Europe. And yet here we are. There is a war in Eastern Europe, a serious war. And because of that complacency, because of that complacent, dogmatic belief in liberal democracy as the end of history, as the final and perfect, complete form of government, we are utterly complacent about the weaknesses of liberal democracy and the implication of the enemies of liberal democracies attacking them. So this is a very interesting point that he makes there. There's a kind of hubris, a sort of pride in this form of government. I mean, that thesis, I did a little bit on that recently. I was reading a bit of that book recently, and some of another article that Francis Fukuyama wrote. I mean, it's the most stunningly arrogant thing to believe that liberal democracy is the final form of government. Like it could not get any better than this. He says, there's no inherent contradiction within the liberal democratic system. And I just say about that, the very basis of liberal democracy is contradictory insofar as it promotes equality and freedom, and equality and freedom are in tension with each other. You can't have perfect equality and perfect freedom. It's not the way it works. It's a dialectic between the two at best. Go on, Tom, carry on.
Well, I was going to say, it ignores the fact that, of course, the perfect form of governance is the sort of it would be the perfect sort of theocratic monarchy, really, which is what God is. The return of Christ will usher in
that would be better than liberal democracy.
A kingdom of theocratic sort of dominance. God as center of the king. It's why God was so irritated at Israel when they demanded a king, because he's like, well, I'm your king,
to be like the nations.
You've got me. You've got God as your king, and you want Saul. It's so, in one sense it's completely anti-Christian. We're not in favor of any particular type of human way of ordering sort of consensus across society, so I guess is what you might call a government.
I think you could say you're in favour of them, but you could just say that they're provisional.
Okay.
Which really,
any particular kind.
The conservative position is that you make a provisional form of government based on observation of what's worked best in the past.
Yeah.
Which is very different to the liberal democratic view, which is a kind of it's a deduction from philosophical axioms, which are ostensibly accessible to reason, which of course they're not, because everyone disagrees about how to.
But of course, the other thing is that the liberal democracy has never been a static form of government anyway. I mean, we've seen that here. The democracy that we have now is miles different to democracy that was even 30 years ago. The New Labour did away with an awful lot of the trappings of the previous sort of way that things were done. I mean, I was reading just the other day. I was reading about how just a bit of research into the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, and that was only made in 1985. Before that, there was a very complicated system of moving courts, Crown courts that travelled around the country, which basically went right the way back to the sort of is it the Wittergamut? Not the what's it called? That's from Harry Potter. The Witten. She uses a sort of semi-Anglo-Saxon name to make it sound. Which it was. Is it the Wit? Can you remember the name of the moving parliament in the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms?
I can't remember what it's called.
Something to do with.
I'll try.
Anyway, this idea that the sort of King's Justice would move around the country and see sort of things happening. Things like that went out of were constituent parts of our liberal democracy.
It's the Witten.
It is the Witten. Okay, I was quite close.
Yeah.
Or the sort of idea that the Lord Chancellor was an appointed position that was head of the separation that didn't have the separation that we have now, or the idea that we didn't used to have a Supreme Court. The Supreme Court was the House of Lords, the Law Lords. So there's no static liberal democracy to pin on as a sort of end of history, is there? That's my point, really.
No.
And then the EU is a massive change, a sort of bureaucratic entity of civil law that has a very different way of governing to us.
Well, that's the joining together of liberal democracies in a European superstate or any kind of superstate is consistent with the idea that the best form of government is accessible to universal human reason, rather than something that grows up organically in a local, in a nation, in a local context. So you don't need different governments in different nations, according to the liberal view, because nations are irrelevant. All you need is reason, and you can have that in a Central European superstate as much as you can in a national entity. Anyway, Tom, let's just carry on with this for a minute, because there's important points here. So the first one is that the response to COVID-19, harsh lockdowns, often lasting months at a time, were enforced in practically every country on earth. At the time, the UK engaged in a massive programme of quantitative easing and of giving billions of pounds in furlough. to people who couldn't work and people who needed their businesses propped up. But now, because of what's going on, the opposite is having to happen. So the Bank of England have apparently announced a program of quantitative tightening in order to try and get inflation under control. It's
the lie of modern monetary theory, isn't it? It's finally fallen apart. It's constantly saying that, which is this silly idea that effectively you can keep inflating the money supply as long as you take it away again through tax. Which
right.
is
So
just sort of,
what is quantitative tightening? I don't actually know, because
presumably quantitative tightening is buying back bonds that were sold.
Right. Okay. So because quantitative easing is basically about just printing money, isn't it? Right. So yeah. I just thought, is it just taking?
Well, it's not quite printing money. It's selling bonds.
Right.
It's very complicated, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, let's not go into it.
I don't know enough about it, but maybe
it doesn't really matter that much. Anyway, the other point is, so that was a harm which was imposed upon our nation, which didn't need to be that way. It was short-termist. People didn't think it through. And then the other thing is, and this is probably the most relevant now, is that energy, as he writes here, as Myers writes, is arguably where the most serious self-harm has been committed. Runaway prices are causing misery to households, while industry could be facing a blackout or a winter of blackouts. This is why. So it should be obvious to all that advanced industrial societies need cheap, abundant, and secure supplies of energy, whether there is a crisis or not. But our elites have traded all this in for green virtue signaling. This is crazy. This is why only a year ago, a cabinet minister, that's Alok Sharma, by the way, who was in charge of the, do you remember that COP26 that happened last year, which was the most important thing that ever happened in the history of the world? This is why only a year ago, a cabinet minister was happy to be filmed celebrating the demolition of a power plant. I actually clicked on the link there, and there's a tweet of Alex Sharma standing in front of a coal power plant in Ferrybridge, which is being demolished. And he is, as the article says, he's talking about how great it is and how wonderful it is that they're demolishing this coal power plant. It's why, to continue with the article, successive governments have blocked new and cheap ways to access much needed gas. It's why they've tried to hamper investment in domestic oil production. And it's why they've promoted unreliable, intermittent renewables above all other sources of energy. After more than a decade of neglect and managed decline, our energy supplies are simply too fragile to absorb a shock the size of the Ukraine war. And this is another bit that stuck out to me. All of these policies, from lockdown to money printing to net zero extremism, are made 1,000 times worse by the complacency and short-termism that has defined politics for so long. A recently revived viral video of former Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg seems to sum up this problem. Have you seen this, Tom?
Yeah.
Filmed in 2010, he dismisses the prospect of expanding nuclear power because new power plants won't come online until 2021 or 2022. So that's why it's not worth it, Tom. It's not worth investing in something that will produce power in 11 years, because that's really far in the future.
To be fair, given the complete incompetence of our governance to achieve anything, the idea that they might be online right now is probably a figment of imagination. Like, can you really imagine them managing to build a nuclear power station in 10 years?
I don't know. I don't know how long it takes to build it.
They'll probably still be in the courts.
Well,
anyway, at least they could have tried.
The point is, I mean, that's the thing that really made me think of this Joseph passage, because it's like the complete opposite of what Joseph did, where he thought 7 years in the future, we're going to have a famine. We need to save now an appropriate amount of food, of grain, in order to get through the famine that's coming. Now, the way that our politicians work is they're short-termist, and let's face it, they're probably short-termist because our political scene is dominated by careerists and people who are only interested in promoting themselves and being as powerful and influential as possible without actually caring about the common good. And this energy thing is it's just a number one example of this. You know, you've got a situation now. I mean, I know I keep saying things like that. We've got a situation now where we're facing blackouts. So another article I've flagged up this week is in the Telegraph, where it says blackout Britain. Well, let's read it. Let's read the headline if it comes up. Blackout Britain threats it's not coming up for some reason. Anyway, Britain faces South African style load shedding. Basically, what this means is that in the winter this year, we could be facing a situation in which we don't have enough electricity, we don't have enough power. So the government are going to limit the amount of power that we can use. And these, if this does happen, which we're assured at the moment by the government, it won't, although it does seem to be quite likely that it could happen. The power could be shut off in our homes in the morning and in the evening, when which are the peak times for power usage, which is obviously understandable because that's when people are in their homes doing things. So we could be in a situation where our ability to heat and light our homes, our ability to cook and do other essential things is limited because we've run out of energy in our nation, in Great Britain in 2022. This is so, I mean, apart from the fact that it's such a failure on the part of our elites to just take care of their own people.
Whilst we're still sitting on 200 years worth of coal power at our current rates.
Yeah, absolutely.
Under the ground, under the ground.
Yeah, but the thing I was going to say, Tom, this is why the church should care about this. I mean, it should care anyway, but this is why the church should care. We should stop banging on about this environmental lunacy, this idea that we can control the weather through not using cars and having bag for life shopping bags and all this kind of stuff. And we should actually think about the people who this is going to affect, because this is going to affect poor people, it's going to affect old people, it's going to affect people who are vulnerable. It is literally going to kill people because the most vulnerable who are the most easily who will die the most easily will suffer first from this. So we should care as people in the church about this, because those people who we're supposed to care about, suffering, the vulnerable, the poor, the elderly, people who are unwell, will suffer first from this. And it's perfectly all right for people like Rishi Sunak to say, this is the price we're paying for supporting the Ukrainian war effort, but his own people, the people he's supposed to represent or he's purporting to represent as potential prime minister, are going to suffer and die because of their incompetence and complacency over this issue. So that's why we should care about this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
What about that, Tom? What about that article about civil disobedience in Unheard?
It's a good article again. It is. Or basically coming around some of the same ideas that we've been talking about already. Let me just find it whilst I get it open so I can exactly remind myself. So it's basically it's almost predicting, almost calling for civil disobedience as a result of this. So the idea being that as the average energy bill hits it's expected to hit about 4,200 average energy bill for £350 a month, double what it is currently, fourfold increase on the average bill a year ago. Now, obviously pushing, I think a
fourfold, what was that, a fourfold increase on the average energy bill?
Yeah, a year ago, yeah.
Wow.
And this is going to push families directly into poverty. 10.5 million households, a third of the total, are going to go into some sort of poverty. They're not going to be able to pay this increase in energy, and it's going to hit everything. Absolutely everything. Shops, building. We're already looking in my churches. How can we just stop heating them? The churches get very unpleasant if you stop heating them. But if we're ending up paying, because this is of course domestic supply is cheaper than the commercial supply that we have to buy, even though it's negotiated down because we do a group purchasing. The point is that he's saying is that the government are doing nothing about it. They're sleepwalking through this. There's been no concrete plans not in the medium term, not in the short term, no long term, nothing, no vision about what they need to do. He says, observing the actions of our governing elites conjures up the unsettling image of a monkey handling a shotgun. They're completely unable to think about this in the severity that it requires, and the seriousness it requires. So he there's an interesting thing about the EU having fundamentally changed our form of governance from sort of social democratic to sort of post-political technocratic sort of thing, and the technocrats have completely failed to think through what they're doing, probably because they're completely going to be insulated from it, aren't they? They're not going to need to worry about the thing. Anyway, his and actually he seems to he's sort of attacking the post-Brexit state of the UK in the here he quotes academic Tara McCormack. Rather than opening up areas of policy to democratic scrutiny, the Brexit vote seems to push the government in the opposite direction, a determination to avoid democratic scrutiny as much as possible. This was demonstrated by the way the governing class exploited COVID and then Ukraine to embrace a politics of emergency that permitted it to carry on avoiding democratic accountability, which I think is a good point.
That's true.
So he basically says there's going to be civil, there almost should be civil disobedience in order to the government to force the government to take the issue seriously. And one thing he points people to. Sort of hints. I don't know. I mean, we're not. I don't.
He's not advocating violent disobedience.
He's not advocating. No.
He's advocating for. Well, one of the ideas he implies might work is from people to not pay their energy bills.
So this is a website called don'tpay.uk, which has got 100,000 people so far signed up to simply not paying the energy bills, which would immediately scupper the energy companies and force them to do something.
He's advocating ultimately bringing the energy suppliers back into public ownership.
Yeah, I'm not certain that'll achieve much, because I'm not certain that our public the sort of governmental structures are competent enough to make a better job of this than the private ones. But I mean, there is a good point, and I saw this elsewhere. That which is fair enough, that with these sort of semi-public, semi-private companies, you tend to be in a position where the profit is privatized, but any risk is held by the public, which we saw sort of in the banking crisis as well, 2008. When we bailed out the banks, the risk of the banks was
the same thing with the pharmaceutical industry, isn't it? They get the profit, and everyone else has to worry about side effects and the consequences of treatments going bad. Yeah. So I'm not quite so sure that that there's a perfect answer the way they are now. I'm not certain. I mean, the problem I think is already here now, isn't it? It's like if Joseph hadn't saved up the grain and the famine comes, and it's like, well, it's too late to do anything about it now. As you say, we have natural resources. We could have built nuclear power plants, but instead of doing that, we've spent our time, investing in green renewables, which clearly are not sufficient to deal with this problem. And it's the disaster is upon us. Sorry about that, everyone. We have. I mean, in all seriousness, we're in our household, we're talking about what we're going to do in preparation for potential power cuts. So buying candles, buying lights which don't need to be powered by the mains, thinking about how to cook and so on and so forth. It's probably just prudent. In all seriousness, it's not preparing for the apocalypse. It's not the apocalypse. It's a very real possibility of power cuts. And if there are going to be sustained power cuts in the evenings in winter, you need to be prepared. You need to be prepared for it. So anyway, so that's that stuff. So the other big thing, Tom, that happened this week is the stabbing of Salman Rushdie. So for anyone who is not aware, Salman Rushdie is an author who wrote a book called The Stannic Verses, which I think was released is it in the 80s or is it 1985, I think? Anyway, I've not actually read it. I've got a copy of it. But
it's apparently turgid and boring.
It's quite long. I ordered it and it came through and it's really long. Anyway, apparently, it's apparently has material which is considered
I
think
the blasphemy, the bit that they're concerned about is that there's this idea that some of the verses inserted into the Quran were. It implies that some of the verses inserted into the Quran were satanic, that were given to Muhammad by the devil, not by the angel Gabriel. No.
Just to continue with the story. So basically, a fatwa was placed on his head by, I think it was the Iranian Khomeini, wasn't it?
It was the heads of the Iranian government / church, which is a theocracy. Of course.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Anyway, so that has been on his head for ages, and everyone, I think, basically thought that there was very little possibility of this happening. But a man in his 20s stabbed Salman Rushdie, rushed the stage at a literary event and stabbed him
multiple times in the throat, wasn't it?
Yeah. In New York, and he's still alive, isn't he? But he's not in great condition. I think there's talk of him losing an eye and being potentially permanently disabled in some form, but I'm not clear on the details. And I think one of the things to say is that obviously it's a terrible thing. Our sympathy is with him and his family, and we pray for him and everyone who's suffering as a result of what's happened. I don't really feel like I've got a huge amount which is profound to say about this. Lots of people are trying to make out that this is a sort of free speech issue. There's an article in Spiked about how drawing, I think it's what's his name, Brendan O'Neill, drawing a parallel between Salman Rushdie's right to offend Muslims and J.K. Rowling's right to offend transgender ideologues. And that this is a sort of, I guess what he's saying is that identity politics is a kind of secularized blasphemy, secularized form of blasphemy, I suppose. Identity politics, policing of language at least, is a kind of secularized form.
That's not, I mean, the problem is that that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a theocratic state that has declared sort of single-handed war on a person, effectively. I mean, obviously, Iran is wrong and evil to do that. And obviously, the right of people to offend. I don't know of anyone defending the right of, Iranian, inspired people to stab people. I don't really understand. I mean, at the same time as everyone is virtue signaling about one thing, we get this Ukrainian, English citizen who's covering the war in Ukraine from a Russian perspective, who's apparently not allowed to have free speech. Have you seen this at all?
No, I don't.
No, you haven't. Okay, this is quite an interesting one. Let me find it. It's in the Spectator. Basically there's a blogger sort of video pod. Is that what you call it? Blogger. Podcaster type person that is covering the war in Ukraine. He's lived in the Ukraine in the area for many years, and he's covering the war. He's pro-Russia, and our government have included him under the sanctions that are attached to the Russian money, but no, not pro-Russian. They're just Russians, generally, as part of the sanctioning, and they've included him on that list. So he's no longer able to have a bank account, no longer able to pay money. People aren't able to. He's got a mortgage and a house and bills and council tax. He's unable to access his money to do that. But he's a British citizen. The government can't just go declaring British citizens as persona non grata and seizing their assets in that way. That would be completely against the Magna Carta. That's the whole point of the Magna Carta. It's arbitrary judgment. If they want to do that, they have to take him to court to read some charges against him. And as far as I can tell, the only charges that they've put up against him are that he is pro-Russian in the Ukrainian war, which is not a crime. It must be said. We're not at war with Russia. There is no law against supporting Russia. I mean, it might be distasteful. He may be wrong. He may be he may be covering up all sorts of awful things. They are not crimes. So having his assets frozen and seized is obviously extrajudicial power being applied on British citizens by their own government. It's illegal. So at the same time as you support one sort of free speech, the government is making all sorts of noises about Salman Rushdie, but not, in practice, they only want free speech that they can that is sanitized, which is not free speech at all.
Yeah. I think that's right, Tom. And there is a dangerous tendency, isn't there, in the government towards censorship. And we're seeing this with the online harms bill as well. Yeah. It's very worrying. But I guess, yeah, I just don't know about this thing about, well, let's use the stabbing of Salman Rushdie to make some kind of point about how we need free speech in society. Because it's not like a modern free speech issue. The thing about blasphemy in Islam, it's a common feature of religious history. The title, I know. Well, I mean, Brendan O'Neill may have come up with this title, but how identity politics turn violent. This isn't identity politics turning violent. This is something that's been going on for a lot longer than the kind of modern identity politics project. But anyway, as I say, I don't really have very much that's interesting to say about that. Should we go on to the email of the week, Tom? Because it's a good one. It's coming back on this Archie Battersbee case, so we read an email out that was very much against what had happened, against the ruling of the courts and the NHS and so on. So for balance, we're going to have another email. Now, it's worth saying that a number of people emailed in with saying a similar thing to what this email says, which is that there is another side to this argument, and I selected this one because I think it's very clear and it's well put. So we're just doing this with balance, really. But there was a strong reaction, and that was clear in the amount of emails that were sent. So anyway, dear Revs, I was glad that you will return to the Archie story this week. I think the issues are complex in this particular case, and Christians aren't always clear on the parameters we should work in. In a hospital, I missed a sentence. I think William Phillips touched on it in one of the podcasts you did with him, which was perhaps on care homes. And what he said resonated with the premises I work with on end-of-life issues. In a hospital, they are specific to medics, but they apply universally to life. So these are premises. 1, doctors are not permitted to take life. 2, doctors do not have a duty to keep patients alive at all costs. 3, doctors have a duty of care to all people at every stage of life, including alleviating suffering. I think Christians struggle over 2, which is that doctors don't have a duty to keep patients alive at all costs. Feeling like it's a position that could allow euthanasia, but it is part of accepting that we are finite and that we live in a fallen world where physical death is inevitable and is countered by premise 3, which is that doctors have a duty of care to all people at every stage of life, including alleviating suffering. In Archie's case, it seemed that a clinical judgment was made that Archie would not live without life support, and therefore the duty of care left to doctors was to let him die. It was not entirely helpful language that the family referred to turning off life support as a sentence of execution, when perhaps doctors were closer to enacting premise 2 than undermining premise 1. So not having a duty to keep him alive at all costs rather than taking life. It also seems to me in this circumstance that doctors, bound by more confidentiality than the family, were not able to give their side of the story, e.g. what explanations have been given to the family, what counselling offered, etc. Clearly, the circumstances in which Archie was injured were so traumatic that this may have made these conversations hard to have, and also made accepting the death of a previously healthy child much harder to accept. So just to stop there for a minute, because there's another point that's made here. So this the person who's writing is saying that there's a distinction between ending somebody's life, actively ending somebody's life, say, for example, giving them a drug which could kill them, and taking somebody, removing a treatment from somebody, so removing somebody from life support, if that person cannot live without the life support, or perhaps is already dead. So there's a philosophical distinction there between those 2 points. Removing life support from someone is not the same as euthanizing them. I think that's the point there. I have to say that is what I thought previously to hearing about this case, that there is a distinction between those 2 things. And in this particular case, I still am unclear as to what was being suggested.
I guess, I guess
in terms of the family's position.
One way of sort of thinking about it might be, if you were giving CPR and keeping someone alive through giving CPR, are you morally bound to keep doing it forever? the moment you stop doing it, is that your fault? Have you killed them? Well, the answer is no, isn't it? You were keeping them alive, but if it becomes untenable, if it becomes impossible, if it becomes beyond your ability, then stopping and then and letting what happens happen is not a, there's a point at which, if there's a point at which it goes beyond reasonable care, isn't it?
Yeah, but if the person may have recovered and you stopped giving CPR, then you would be culpable for allowing them to die in a way which was not right on your
so discovering what stage that person's in to the best of your moral ability is what you need to do in that case, isn't it?
But Tom, do you know what the family were suggesting in terms of were they just saying?
I think the family
permanently.
I think the family held out hope that their hope was that the clinical diagnosis was wrong, that his brainstem was still functioning, and could therefore have limited functionality, continuing.
Right. Okay.
I think.
So they were saying he should continue being on life support until more information was known, or until he could be given potentially different treatments and so on.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's so there. I think for my mind, I definitely accept the distinction between taking life and allowing somebody to die. I think that distinction is very clear. I think in this case, the issue is an empirical issue of what was the actual situation. And I think the empirical facts are the thing which are, that's the thing which would help you to know whether it was a question of taking life or allowing somebody to die. Those premises 1 and 2 that are outlined here. So just to carry on, another narrative that I think it's important not to embrace too quickly is the state overriding the will of the family and turning off life support. I'm sympathetic to the state's power being limited, and the consent of the family should be sought. But in this instance, consent surely was sought but rejected. Hence the need to appeal to the courts with clear evidence that Archie was not capable of life without life support, so the doctors could be given permission to fulfill premise 2, which is allowing him to die. No one ever wins when something goes to a courtroom, and perhaps the tragedy here is that Archie's family, so evidently in need of pastoral support to walk the painful road of shock, grief and acceptance, didn't receive the solace that would enable them to accept loss, whether Archie died or lived, in a physically diminished way to his existence before the accident. I thought Jamie and Tom handled the email well, but I think the email was a barometer of some of the binary responses to the issue that have come out when, as you both said, this is primarily a family tragedy, which has been very painful for them, but I expect traumatic for the doctors involved, whose instincts have been sorely tested and who will feel very conflicted about what has happened after facing fierce scrutiny. As always, I think we as Christians have a better story of hope and grace to speak into this. So I will be praying for this segment this week, as it needs special handling, not least because how we handle death when it steals and destroys is a key distinctive in Christian discipleship. God bless, and so on. So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that email, and thank you for your prayers. I'm trying to find, just for the sake of balance, the Christian Institute released a.
Wasn't it Christian Concern who was dealing with this?
Yeah, Christian Concern, that's it. Released a sort of Q&A about this. I just want to read out some of them, because they do put some and it's worth sort of hearing the other side. So let me just see.
They've got an article which is called 12 Myths.
The top 12 myths of Archie Battersbee's case. So myth number 1 is Archie was brain dead according to his doctors. So they say that actually no doctor ever diagnosed Archie as brain dead. The established test for diagnosing brainstem death could not be carried out. Some doctors said Archie was likely to be brain dead based on MRI and CT scans, but the same doctor said in the same breath that he had a 1 to 5 chance of making some recovery. So there's there is there's a slim chance of some recovery that was acknowledged by the doctors who diagnosed it, but in the end the justice of the court found that on the balance of probabilities, which is the standard of proof in civil litigation, he was brain dead. There are certain other things that they address.
Why don't we just read out some of the myths, Tom? So
okay.
Number 2, by keeping Archie alive, the NHS would be wasting resources needed for treating other children. Number 3, the hospital only took the family to court as a last resort after all attempts to reach a compromise bail. They question that. Number 4, the case ended up in courts because the family had unrealistic hopes that Archie would recover. They say that's not true. Number 5, the courts put Archie at the centre of this case and made a decision based on objective evidence of what Archie would have wanted for himself in his own best interests. They say that's a myth. The only alternative was to force doctors to act unconscionably by violating Archie's best interests.
So that's that's an interesting one, because they say here doctors can always refuse to give treatment that is contrary to their conscience. There's no need to take a family to court for that. However, in that scenario, they must also arrange for a different doctor or a different team who do not have the same conscientious objection to advise and treat the patient. Now, I am pretty certain that Christian Concern would not say the same, for example, in the case of an abortion, where they would say that no doctor should do that. I don't know. There seems to be a slight sense in which different standards are being applied to different things there. But anyway, yeah. Should we keep going? Number 7, cases of this kind are very rare. They say there's sort of 5 or 6 cases a year, which sounds pretty rare, but okay. Myth 8. Archie was not a disabled person, so one cannot say he was deprived of right to life because of his disability. Well, he clearly was disabled. He had no brain function, or very little brain function. So, myth 9: UN interim measures only a request, not a legally binding injunction. Well, I mean, that's an interesting one. I'm not a huge fan of legally binding injunctions being issued by extra governmental organizations on the whole. And so I would say, even if this was a righteous one, I'd rather they didn't. This is, I don't quite see there, because the UN issue all sorts of injunctions, which I would hope that our country ignore at times. The myth 10: there is no reason to doubt that senior judges who considered this case made a right decision in accordance with the law of the land. Okay.
I think the next one is important because it relates to what we said. So thou shalt not kill has absolutely nothing to do with the planned withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment in the patient's own best interest, based on medical opinion, in line with NHS protocols, etc. But so what they're saying here is that the distinction between active killing and withdrawing life support is very important in the context of a patient in full capacity making decisions for himself. They claim that Archie wanted to live
due to previous things that he had said, yes, but okay. Who knows? But I mean, I think it's a bit unfair to say on an appointed day the doctors come into the room and do the act which they know will certainly result in his death. In this context, is the ethical difference so clear? Well, I think there is a difference in ethics actually between doing something which will definitely. I mean, they're sort of, on one hand, they're trying to argue that he had the capacity to return to life and a miracle might happen. On the other hand, they're arguing that there's a dead certainty that if he had the life support turned off, he would die. Those two claims aren't quite compatible. I think there is a difference, because otherwise you'd end up with everyone stuck on life support.
Yeah, they're not saying there's no difference. They're saying it's a myth that thou shalt kill has nothing to do with a planned withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment if the person who's on that treatment wants to live. So they're saying that. So, like I said, it's an empirical issue. It's an issue of what the facts are on the ground. So it's interesting. Anyway, I'll put that on the I'll put that on the show notes and people can look at it. It is a difficult case, and I think there's things to be said on both sides. And what you really wouldn't want with a situation like this is a reckless approach to turning off a life support machine of a child who might be able to recover to some degree, and overriding the will of the family. I mean, that would be very bad. And the one of the myths that they talk about there is that this is a rare thing, and they mentioned several other cases where similar things have happened as well. So I think there's a lot to be said on both sides of this, and obviously it's very, very sad and tragic for the family and terrible for them. So Tom, let's do let's do one. Let's do a question of the Rev to finish, shall we?
All right.
Questioning of the Rev. Hang on a second. Here we go. Tom, it's time once again to be questioned in Question the Rev. Are you excited about this?
Very excited, Jeremy. I always love Question the Rev.
Yeah, I do as well. And I'm looking forward to talking to you, Tom, today about a question which I definitely haven't just read off Telegram just this second. Let's read. What should we do here? All right, let's do this one. Hang on a second. No. This is excellent. This is fantastic. This is brilliant. Okay, hang on a second. I've definitely got one now. Here we are. Is Revelation a relic of the past, or is it a gift to lead us towards a future form of Christianity? And have any of you been visited by angels? Tom?
Oh, okay. Oh, there's lots of questions there. So firstly, none of the Bible's simply locked in the past, and none of the Bible is simply a guide to the future. I think that's fair to say. To start with, it's all spiritually relevant now. It was spiritually relevant then, and it will be spiritually relevant in the future. I'm not certain what you mean by a new form of Christianity, though. That alarms me slightly. Christianity.
He didn't say he's a future form of Christianity.
A future form. I don't know. A future form. Christianity is. I quite like Walter Pannenberg and his idea of part in inauguration. Gosh. Do you not like him? Is he a heretic? Is he? I don't know. The idea is that we live in a part inaugurated eschaton. We do, don't we? We do. So the cross is a thing of the past. It's also a thing of the future. It's our hope and it's our salvation, which I think is what he's trying to say in that. Would you disagree?
No. I just the invocation of these German Protestants just makes me shiver, Tom.
As far as I'm aware, he's Orthodox. He's not like a Tillich or a Bart.
All right, let's not go into it.
Or a Moltmann.
We will alienate our listenership. We should stick to traditional Anglican sources of theology, Tom, from the Church of England. Yeah. Okay. But anyway, carry on. That's fine. I'm just joking.
Anyway, so what's the final bit of the question, Jamie? Can you just remind me?
I don't know. I can't.
Have I been visited by angels? Not as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
But it'd be nice. I don't think I've not had sort of. The word angel comes from messenger, of course. I've not had any sort of direct angelic messages, but one hopes that we're looked after, guarded.
Right. So the answer is no to that question.
Yeah, this is no.
So the answer is no. So hang on a second. Let me see. I don't really have anything to say about the Revelation thing. I think you've answered that very well. And to be honest, I've lost the question. I can't remember what it was. But the angels thing is interesting. I've never been visited by an angel, but I know people who claim to have been. And probably about 12 years ago, when I was part of charismatic evangelical church, it was part of the New Frontiers movement. There was a big sort of hoo-ha about an ostensible revival that was going on in the US, where people were claiming that angels were visiting really regularly. It was a guy called Todd Bentley who was overlooking over. Yeah, actually, I've just done a quick search. Yeah, he's like a big guy, quite large, overweight, has a beard and lots of tattoos. So he's got a past. He's edgy. And there was this big ostensible revival. Everyone's going on about angels all the time and how there's angel dust in their meetings and all that kind of thing. A scripture which is relevant here, Colossians 2:18. Let no one disqualify you, insisting on asceticism and worship of angels, going on in detail about visions, puffed up without reason by his sensuous mind, and not holding fast to the head, speaking of Christ, of course, from whom the whole body, nourished and knit together through its joints and ligaments, grows with a growth that is from God. So any kind of fixation with angels or visions or anything like that, which doesn't sort of aid our worship of Christ and our acknowledgement of him as the head of the church, is very suspicious. And it can lead people, in their imaginations and their sort of excitement to get a bit carried away and to be distracted from the truth. So Colossians 2:18, important verse there. which clearly, people, this kind of thing was happening in the church at Colossae as well. So there you go, Tom.
Very good. Yeah.
Don't worship angels. And if you do see angels, think about the way that this leads you to Christ, into a deeper intimacy with him. That's what I'd say.
Yep.
Anyway, so let's do a prayer and then we'll finish up. You want to do a prayer or shall I?
All right, then. Okay. You do. I did last week.
I'll do it. Okay. Dear Lord, we pray for everybody who might be struggling or suffering or anxious at the moment, particularly about things that may be coming in the future, this winter, shortages, blackouts and difficulties that may be coming our way. We pray, Lord, that we would find your peace, and that we pray that we would know godly wisdom as to how to prepare. We pray especially for those people who are distressed, for your peace to be with them. We pray for Salman Rushdie and everybody who is in pain and grieving as a result of what's happened. We pray for the family of Archie Battersbee and all who grieve and mourn his loss. We pray for righteousness and justice to prevail in that case. And we offer this time to you. We give you thanks for this conversation that we've had. We pray for your presence to be with everybody listening and watching. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Okay, Tom. God bless you. God bless
you
too, Tom. And looking forward to next week now.
Yep.
Okay, bye now.